Hi, my name is Mary, and in today's video I'm going to be doing my December 2019 wrap-up. I did mean to film this at the end of December, but I didn't bring my filming equipment with me when I went home for Christmas, so this is coming to you a little bit delayed. I read a total of 7 books in December, so let's get right into them. The books that I read this month are basically divided into 2 categories. I read poetry this month, and then I read classics this month. So I'm going to start out with the poetry and do my best to convey a little bit about what each poet is about and what I thought of them. I haven't figured out the best way to do this because I do find it hard to give you really a sense of what a poet's sound is without just reading you some of the poems. So without further ado, let's get into the poetry first. The first poetry collection that I want to talk to you about is called Variations on Dawn and Dusk by Beachy-Quick. This is a poetry collection which takes on a work of art, an installation by Robert Irwin that is in Texas right now, and it's his Untitled, and it is a installation in a hospital in this particular town, and it plays with light. Best way I can describe it to you. I'll leave a link for more information about the exhibition, like the artwork, down below because I think that the artwork is far more interesting than the poetry. I found most of this poetry completely incomprehensible. Do you remember that graphic that went around like the internet for a while where it's somebody holding up a sign to the sky and it says like, do you remember how is feel touch the sky or something like that? And it's like, it's just incomprehensible. That's how I felt that this poetry was. It was poetry that was scattered all over the page, but in such a way as to disrupt grammatical structure and disrupt meaning, and it was an overall extremely negative reading experience, which is a lot for a 48 page book, which should have been a quick, easy, good read, and an easy A for me because I like poetry about art. However, I gave this one 1 star. The second collection that I'll talk to you about is called Build Yourself a Boat by Camonghne Felix. This is Felix's debut poetry collection, I believe, and is around themes of trauma and survival and building new things from the wreckage, basically. But what I loved about it was its sense of rhythm. There is really a sense of rhythm in these poems. They get you moving with the words on the page while still retaining meaning and being quite powerful and punchy. For me, I give it a 4 star, and that's because I liked a lot of the poems in there. There were some that I didn't like, and 5-star poetry collections for me are pretty rare, but this is definitely a poetry collection that I would recommend picking up. It's quite short, and it would be a good introduction to poetry for people that are looking to move beyond some of the complete intro basics, and I think a lot of people would benefit from reading this particular collection. Now let's bridge the gap between poetry and classics with a classic collection of poetry, or classic book of poetry. That is the Ruba'iyat of Omar Khayyam. This is a Persian poet from the 11th and 12th century, I believe, who wrote the best poetic manifesto for alcoholism I have ever read. The Ruba'iyat is extremely famous. There is a translation of it from the 19th century that's quite famous. However, I read the new translation that just came out, which is by Peter Avery and John Heath-Stubbs, and I loved it. I thought it was fabulous. This poem has a lot of almost heretical concern in it for what does it mean if heaven is a place where I can only get to if I starve myself of pleasure on earth when I could have heaven on earth and be drunk all the time. It doesn't sound deep or meaningful, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a fabulous poem. I thought that the translation was great and effective. There's just lines from the poem that I wanted to pull out of it and just dwell inside, and it does make me want to read both more specifically Persian and Islamic poetry and more classic poetry, more generally speaking. So this was definitely a win for me this month, and I gave it 4 stars. Now moving into the classics proper, I have already made a video about this next one. That is News from Nowhere by William Morris. This is William Morris's socialist utopian arts and crafts novel about what it would be like if we had communism and didn't have to work for a living and didn't have industrial capitalism hanging over our heads, and what that would mean specifically for social happiness and for artistic beauty and for artistic production and our understanding of the value of things. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I will link my video review of it in the comments down below, and I do recommend that you give that one a watch if you want to read my full thoughts. I gave this one 5 stars. Next, for a classic work of nonfiction, which I will not dwell on too much, I read The Elements of Style, which is by William Strunk Jr. and E.B. White. This is a early 20th century book about the art of writing. This was assigned for one of my graduate courses. It's extremely short, but what I will say is that it has been written for not just authors of nonfiction, in fact mostly not for authors of nonfiction of academic work, but for all writers, and I do think that there's a lot of valuable stuff in here, but it wasn't my favorite thing that I read this month. I gave it 3 stars. If you are a writer and looking for something short that I still think holds up after all these years, I would recommend The Elements of Style. The prize for the strangest thing that I read in the month of December definitely goes to Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin A. Abbot. This is a very odd book. It's quite short, so if you want to read it, it will not take you very long, but it will confuse you, perhaps, as it did me. I see this recommended as a work of Victorian political commentary. It is a 19th century classic, which takes the premise of a world called Flatland, which exists in 2 dimensions. Men are shapes, and the more shapes that they have, the higher class that they are, so that there are triangles, and then above them are squares, and above them are pentagons, and then above them are hexagons, and so on and so forth, until you get to people that are so high class in the church that they are nearly circular. And then women are lines, and women as lines are actually quite dangerous, and have to be controlled in a particular way. It is very strange. I was reading it trying to find a comment, trying to find out really where it was in the commentary, what was the social commentary that was coming out of this book, because obviously this is such a strange premise. Is it a comment on why we need eugenics, or why eugenics are bad? Couldn't tell you. Is it a comment on suffrage and upon women's rights? I have no idea. Is it about classism? Maybe. I don't know. It's something that I'm fascinated, that is some people's, like, favorite classic if they're math people or geometry people, because apart from the central premise, there's not a lot in here about mathematics or about geometry. There's one section in particular that I could see somebody who is interested in that really being drawn towards this book. For me, it was just very strange. I'm glad I read it. Now, if you're looking for short classics and you're willing to read a bunch of very strange ideas, I might recommend this to you. I ended up giving it 3 stars. The last book that I read this month has actually started off a little trend in my reading. I read The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde, and it's been inspiring me to read more plays. The Importance of Being Earnest I read because I have read Oscar Wilde in the past and enjoyed his work, but I had not read this play, and I'd never seen this play, and other people were saying that it was funny. Usually when I'm reading, I might give a little, like, a chuckle, just a little, like, ha, while I'm reading, but usually no more than that. I was laughing out loud while I was reading this play. It is so funny. It's about 2 young men who, for various reasons, find that they have to call themselves Earnest, and their interrelated relationship and their pursuit of romance and success and happiness and whatever. It's so funny. It's so silly. It's such a great commentary on 19th century life, and I cannot wait to read more of the, like, shorter humorous essays by Oscar Wilde. I have a few of them that I have been eyeing and willing myself to pick up in the very near future, and definitely I'm reading more plays. Obviously, the best way to experience a play is probably to see it in person. I'm not denying that. It's just that I don't go to see plays in person, so why not read them if me going to see them is already not going to happen? You know what I mean? Please do let me know if you have any recommendations for your favorite plays in the comments down below so that I can make sure to give those a read. Alright, so there you have it. Those are the 7 books that I read in December. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!